She's just playing businesswoman. My father-in-law smiled politely at Thanksgiving dinner. Let her have her fantasy. His brother laughed, as long as she doesn't ask for money again. I looked at them calmly. Funny, because I just bought the building your law firm leases. Rent's going up next year. Happy Thanksgiving. Let her have her fantasy, my father-in-law said with that same patronizing smile he always wore. His brother laughed. As long as she doesn't ask for money again. I sat there calmly at the Thanksgiving table, surrounded by people who never took me seriously, who thought my career was a hobby and my ambition was an inconvenience. So I smiled back and said, funny, because I just bought the building your law firm leases. Rent's going up next year. Happy Thanksgiving. My name's Adrian. I'm 36, divorced, and the co-founder of a fintech startup turned commercial real estate firm in Boston. The story I'm about to tell isn't just about marriage or divorce or Thanksgiving dinner drama. It's about what happens when people underestimate you long enough that they start believing their own delusions, and what happens when you finally, quietly, flip the script. I met my ex-husband, Callum, when we were both in our late 20s. I was wrapping up my MBA at MIT Sloan, and he had just started working as a junior associate at Hawthorne and Bellamy, a family-run law firm with more legacy than innovation. We met at a party in Beacon Hill, the kind of place where everyone drinks wine they can't pronounce and talks like their last name belongs on a building. Callum was charming, handsome, and a good listener at first. He had that old Boston elegance about him, the way he carried himself, the way he ordered drinks without looking at the menu. I didn't come from money. I came from Worcester, public schools, parents who were nurses and teachers. But I had ambition like oxygen, and I didn't care about social circles. When Callum and I started dating, it was easy. He admired my drive, or said he did. I was pouring everything I had into a small app that eventually grew into something we didn't even recognize, a platform aimed at giving minority-owned small businesses access to investment networks. It wasn't glamorous in the beginning. Just long nights, ramen dinners, and crashing investor calls from borrowed coworking spaces. He'd smile and say, "You're really serious about this, huh?" I should have seen the undertone there. But I didn't. Not yet. His family was a different world entirely. The Hawthorns lived in Brookline in one of those grand homes, with ivy crawling up the brick and portraits of long-dead ancestors glaring down at you from every room. His father, Martin, was a senior partner at the law firm. His uncle Charles was another name on the door. They were lawyers, judges, old-school power players with connections to every corner of Boston's political and legal circles. They didn't dislike me. They just didn't get me. And in their world, not getting you meant not respecting you. When I first met them, I could tell they were trying to be polite, but there was a layer beneath it. That careful sort of disdain people use when they're trying to be too refined to say what they really think. I remember Charles leaning over to Callum once at dinner and saying, "At least she's not one of those influencer types." That was his compliment. Martin was worse. He'd ask questions about my startup like it was a craft hobby. "So you make an app?" he asked me once. "Is it something people use for coupons?" I explained the entire business model to him. He nodded and said, "That's nice. Keeps you busy, I'm sure." The condescension was constant, subtle, and dressed up as civility. But I ignored it. I told myself it didn't matter if they took me seriously. What mattered was that Callum did. Except he didn't. Not really. Not once I started actually succeeding. The first real turning point was after I landed a major seed investor. It was a grueling pitch, weeks of back and forth, and when it closed, it felt like oxygen for our company. I came home elated. I wanted to share it with him, but Callum barely looked up from his laptop. "That's great," he said. "Let's order something to celebrate." But he said it like he was congratulating a kid who came second in a spelling bee. That became a pattern. He liked that I was ambitious, but the moment it required attention, real attention, he clocked out. When I stayed up late working on the launch version of our app, he'd say, "You don't have to kill yourself over this. You're not running Apple." He thought he was being helpful, grounding me. What he didn't realize was he was also slowly stepping on everything I'd built, even as I built it. After our Series A funding, I started getting attention. Articles, panels, a minor feature in Forbes Women. I noticed that Callum stopped introducing me as his wife and started saying, "She runs a little startup." Not co-founder, not CEO, just little. I confronted him about it once. He said I was being sensitive. You don't need a label to prove you're successful, he said. Besides, does it really matter what my dad or uncle thinks? It mattered to me, not because I needed their approval, but because I deserved respect. And I wasn't getting it from anyone in that family, not even the man I married. Then came the final straw. I came home early from a canceled dinner with investors. Callum was on the phone, pacing our kitchen. He didn't hear me come in. Yeah, she's still on that businesswoman kick, he said. Honestly, I think it's about proving something, like she needs to show she's better than everyone. Then a pause. Charles's voice faintly on the other line. As long as she doesn't ask for money again. They laughed, my husband and his uncle, like it was a joke, like I was the joke. I didn't say anything, I didn't storm in or slam a door. I just turned around and walked out, got in my car, and drove until the gas light came on. I sat in a parking lot outside a diner in Quincy and cried harder than I had in years. But that was the night something shifted. I wasn't going to beg for recognition. I was going to build so much success they'd have to choke on it. We separated within the year. There wasn't much fighting. Callum seemed relieved almost. He kept the condo in Back Bay. I kept the brownstone we'd bought in Jamaica Plain. I didn't ask for alimony, property splits, or anything else. I didn't want their money. Instead, I poured myself into a pivot. Neha, my co-founder and closest friend, had been thinking about expanding into commercial real estate. Tech had opened doors, but we wanted to own the rooms, so we started a new venture, Lattice Holdings. Quietly, efficiently, we started buying up small commercial properties in Boston that were being sold off post-pandemic. Empty retail spaces, old law offices, warehouses, we renovated it, modernized, leased them out to young professionals and startups. And then, about 2 years into this new venture, I saw a property listing. A brownstone office building downtown. Historic facade, outdated interior, high maintenance. The seller was desperate, needed quick cash. I looked up the address. It was the building housing Hawthorne and Bellamy. I didn't hesitate. I bought it through a shell company we use for acquisitions. No red flags, no direct name on the deed. 6 months later, I signed a letter increasing the rent. Not a ridiculous amount, just market rate, but enough to shake them. I timed the notice to go out the week of Thanksgiving, and then I accepted an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner. Callum's family liked to pretend things were cordial. They'd seen an article or two about our company but dismissed it as tech fluff. That evening, everything felt civil, until Martin leaned over and said, "Still playing businesswoman," Charles added. "Let her have her fantasy. As long as she doesn't ask for money again." I dabbed my mouth with my napkin, smiled, and said, "Actually, I just bought the building your law firm leases. Rent's going up next year. Happy Thanksgiving." They stared at me like I had slapped them across the table. I excused myself after dessert. I haven't spoken to any of them since. But sometimes I walk past that building. They moved out a few months after. Couldn't afford the new rate. A modern law firm took their place. Young, diverse, with glass walls and conference rooms filled with new energy. Funny how the tables turn. The months following that Thanksgiving were eerily quiet. There was no explosion, no confrontation, just silence. Exactly the kind of silence that tells you someone has finally realized what you're capable of, too late to do anything about it. Callum didn't reach out. I wasn't surprised. That was always his way, avoidance dressed up as civility. If he was hurt, if he was angry, if he was humiliated, he'd never let it show. That would mean acknowledging the truth. I had become someone he could no longer minimize. But I heard things. Boston is small, especially in old money circles. Word got around fast that the Hawthorne firm was scrambling. The new lease was unsustainable for them. They tried to renegotiate with the property management company, not realizing it was mine. We held firm. I never spoke directly to them. It wasn't personal. It was just business. The way they always liked to say. Eventually, they broke their lease and moved into a smaller office on the outskirts of Cambridge. A step down, even if they tried to frame it as restructuring. Meanwhile, Lattice Holdings grew faster than we expected. The publicity helped. Not because I used the story, it was never public, but because the investors I'd worked so hard to court now saw what we were building in action. We weren't just another tech company tinkering with numbers. We were turning real estate into equity for the underrepresented, giving new businesses physical roots in a city that had never made space for them. And yet, even with everything going well, I carried that Thanksgiving moment in my head for months after. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about seeing myself clearly for the first time in years. I had spent so long trying to prove I was worthy, not just to them, but to Callum. I thought if I worked harder, succeeded louder, they'd understand. But respect that has to be demanded isn't respect at all. And love that needs to be explained over and over again eventually turns into resentment. There's a specific kind of grief that comes from realizing the person you loved never saw you. They saw their version of you, the manageable version, the one that fits in their world without tipping the balance. When I stopped shrinking to fit that version, the relationship didn't bend, it broke. After the rent increase letter was delivered, our office manager forwarded me a voicemail from someone at Hawthorne and Bellamy. It wasn't Charles or Martin, it was someone from accounting trying to negotiate a delay. I never returned the call. I had our property team handle it like any other tenant. Professionally, efficiently, without emotion. One night, maybe a few weeks after Thanksgiving, I got a text from Callum. Simple, no greeting. Was it really necessary? I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "It was overdue." He never replied. Strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything. The satisfaction people expect from revenge, that rush of justice or vindication, didn't come. What came was something better, a lightness. An unclenching of some part of me that had been locked tight for years. Like I finally exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I started spending less time thinking about the Hawthorns and more time building things that mattered. Our next acquisition was a mixed-use building near Dudley Square, where we leased space to a local nonprofit, a cafe run by women re-entering the workforce, and a small marketing firm run by two former interns we'd mentored during the fintech days. That building became a kind of anchor for us, proof that real power doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from creating something no one else can take away. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret marrying into that family, if I ever wish I'd taken a different path. But here's the thing, I wouldn't be who I am now if I hadn't walked through their world, unnoticed and underestimated. Their indifference built my resilience. Their condescension sharpened my ambition. Their silence made me listen harder, to my instincts, to my limits, and eventually to myself. I don't hate them. I don't think about them much anymore. But when I do, it's like looking at a photograph from a different life. Familiar, but faded. Not something I need to revisit. What mattered more was what came after. Because once you've stopped waiting for people to validate you, you start building things that don't require anyone's permission. In the years that followed, the Hawthorne name began to lose its shine in legal circles. Slowly at first, fewer mentions in industry publications, less presence at charity galas and Boston Power events. Then more obviously, their exit from the prime office location had sparked whispers. Whispers turned to questions, and questions turned to reputational rot. They tried to compensate by rebranding, new signage, a flashier website, even a diversity initiative they clearly didn't understand. But it was too late. The kind of prestige they built doesn't survive visible failure, and their relocation had become a visible failure. Meanwhile, Lattice Holdings thrived. Neha and I expanded into Providence, then Hartford, and eventually into smaller cities throughout New England. Our model was working, buying neglected buildings in good locations and leasing space to people who had historically been shut out of opportunities. Local businesses, women-led startups, first-time restaurant owners. One day, about 2.5 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, I got an email from a familiar name. Alexis Grafton, a senior partner at one of Boston's most prominent venture law firms. She was organizing a commercial property law panel for a Harvard Business School alumni event. They wanted someone from the ownership side to speak. Alexis's email read, "You came highly recommended by several attendees from last year's keynote. Would you consider joining us?" I said yes. It wasn't until I received the final panel list that I saw Charles Hawthorne would be moderating one of the breakout sessions. The event was held at the Boston Harbor Hotel, one of those classic places with hushed lighting and unobtrusive staff. The kind of place the Hawthorns had once held court effortlessly. When I arrived, Charles saw me across the atrium. His face went still for a second. I smiled and nodded like we were old friends passing at a garden party. My panel went exceptionally well. The room was packed. People had questions. They wanted strategy, insight, and partnership. I talked about access, modern investment strategy, and the importance of creating space for new players, not just protecting old ones. Charles's panel had only a handful of attendees. Someone told me afterward that the firm he represented had lost a major corporate client that month. Word was, they'd gone with a younger, hungrier team. A few weeks after the panel, I received a LinkedIn request from Charles. I didn't accept it, but I did smile. Then came the call from a real estate broker we'd worked with before. She was representing a client looking to sublease part of a building we'd recently acquired in Worcester. A law firm. The name made me laugh. Hawthorne Legal Group, no Bellamy, no ampersand, just Hawthorne. A slimmed-down version of what once was. Their new office was modest, tucked into a building we'd just finished renovating. The firm had lost several partners. Their Brookline house had been sold quietly, and rumor had it Martin had retired early, citing health concerns. When the lease request came through, I approved it. I didn't charge them more. I didn't deny them space. I simply let the terms stand. Market rate, standard conditions, nothing personal. And when they moved in, I walked the floor myself one afternoon just to inspect the space. They didn't see me, but I saw them. Callum wasn't there. I heard he'd moved to a consulting role in New York, more behind the scenes now. His flashy days were over. I didn't feel the urge to reach out. There was no need. Revenge had already done its job, quietly, without fire or spectacle. It didn't ruin them. It made them irrelevant. There's something deeper, more enduring, about a world that moves forward without the people who once tried to hold you back. I left the building that day feeling nothing but peace. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just closure. They had once called my dreams a fantasy. Now they pay rent to them.